The roses were wilting. Celine noticed it first in the bouquet clutched between her trembling fingers, the petals browning at the edges, curling inward like they were trying to escape. She had been standing at the altar of St. Crispin's Chapel for 11 minutes now, though it felt like 11 years. The morning light slanted through stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows across the stone floor, beautiful and indifferent to her humiliation. Behind her, 300 guests shifted in their pews. The whispers had started at minute 5, soft as moth wings against glass. By minute 8, they had grown into a low hum that pressed against Celine's spine like cold fingers. Now, at minute 11, the sound was a roar barely contained by good breeding. She kept her eyes fixed on the altar cloth, counting the golden threads in the embroidery. 47, 48, 49. If she counted high enough, perhaps time would reverse. Perhaps Emmerich would appear at the chapel doors, breathless and apologetic, with some perfectly reasonable explanation for his absence. Perhaps the roses would stop wilting. The vicar cleared his throat for the 3rd time, his weathered face cycling through sympathy, discomfort, and something that looked dangerously close to pity. Celine couldn't bear pity. She had endured poverty, endured her father's gambling debts, and endured watching her mother sell her grandmother's pearls one by one to keep creditors from the door. She would not endure pity on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Perhaps, the vicar murmured, leaning close enough that only she could hear, for we might delay the proceedings. The groom may have encountered difficulties on the road. The road from where? Emmerich had been staying at Ravenscourt House, less than 2 miles distant. Even if his horse had thrown a shoe, even if his carriage had lost a wheel, he could have walked here in 30 minutes. 40 minutes had passed since the ceremony was meant to begin. "Miss Whitmore," her mother's voice, tight with controlled panic, came from the front pew. "Darling, perhaps we should—" The chapel doors crashed open. Every head turned. Celine's heart seized in her chest, wild hope flooding through her veins. Emmerich. Finally. She would forgive him, of course she would, and she would forgive him anything if he would just. But it was not Emmerich who strode down the aisle. It was his brother, Aldrich Ashford, the Duke of Ravenscourt, so moved through the chapel like a blade cutting silk. He was still in riding clothes, mud splattered on his boots, his dark hair wind-swept in a way that suggested hard travel. Where Emmerich was golden and warm, Aldrich was all sharp angles and shadows, his face hewn from granite, unforgiving and severe. Celine had met him only twice before. Once at the engagement announcement, where he had regarded her with the detached interest one might give a moderately unusual insect. Once at the rehearsal dinner, where he had spoken perhaps 12 words total, none of them to her directly. He had not been expected to attend the wedding at all. Estate business in the north, Emmerich had explained. Very urgent. Couldn't possibly get away. And yet here he was, stopping 3 feet from the altar, and his chest rising and falling with exertion that his expression refused to acknowledge. His eyes met hers, and Celine felt something cold slide down her spine. Those eyes held no warmth, no comfort, only a terrible, calculating resolve. "Your Grace," the vicar's voice cracked on the title. "We were not expecting. That is to say, your brother has not yet—" "My brother," Aldrich said, his voice cutting through the whispers like a winter wind, "will not be attending." The chapel erupted. Celine heard her mother's gasp, heard the explosion of shocked voices behind her, and heard her own heartbeat thundering in her ears like a drum. But she could not move, could not speak, could only stare at the man before her as the world she had built crumbled to dust around her feet. "I don't understand," she heard herself say. though the voice seemed to come from very far away. "Where is Emmerich? What's happened to him?" Something shifted in Aldrich's expression. Not sympathy, not quite, but perhaps its distant cousin. "Nothing has happened to him. He left Ravenscourt before dawn. By now he's halfway to the continent with the Barrington widow and the contents of his personal accounts." The words landed like physical blows. Each one drove the breath further from Soline's lungs until she was drowning in the open air, surrounded by flowers and candles, and 300 witnesses to her complete and utter destruction. Emmerich had left. Emmerich had run. Emmerich had chosen someone else. The roses finally dropped from her nerveless fingers, scattering petals across the altar steps like tears. "I came," Aldrich continued, his voice dropping lower, meant only for her ears now, "to offer you an alternative." Celine's vision blurred. She was going to faint. Right here, in front of everyone, she was going to collapse and prove herself exactly the weak, pitiable creature society would now believe her to be. The jilted bride, the abandoned woman, the fool who couldn't keep a man even to the altar. "What alternative?" she whispered. Aldrich extended his hand, palm up, steady as marble. "Marry me instead." The whispers died. The chapel fell into a silence so complete that Celine could hear the candle flames flickering, could hear her own ragged breathing, and could hear the blood rushing through her veins. "That's insane," she said. "Perhaps." His expression didn't change. "But it's also your only option that doesn't end in complete ruin. Your family's debts are considerable. Your father's remaining credit was secured against this marriage. Without it, you lose everything. Your home, your mother's last possessions, any hope of respectable futures for yourself or your brother." How did he know about the debts? How did he know any of it? "Why would you—" Celine's voice broke. She forced herself to continue. "Why would you want to marry me?" Something shifted in those cold eyes, something she couldn't name. "I have my reasons," he said. "They don't concern you." "They absolutely concern me if I'm to be your wife." His jaw tightened fractionally. "The vicar is waiting. The guests are watching. Every moment you hesitate is another moment for gossip to solidify into scandal. Decide, Miss Whitmore. Now." Behind her, Celine heard her mother weeping softly, heard her brother Niles cursing under his breath, and heard 300 people holding their breath, waiting to see what the jilted bride would do. She looked at Aldrich's outstretched hand, at the hard lines of his face, at the absolute absence of warmth in his gaze. This man was a stranger, a cold, calculating stranger who had just offered her salvation wrapped in frost, and God help her, she was going to accept. Celine's hand trembled as she placed it in his. His grip was firm, his skin surprisingly warm for a man who seemed carved from January itself. He drew her forward, positioning her beside him at the altar, with the efficiency of someone arranging chess pieces. "Your Grace," the vicar sputtered, his face cycling through approximately 17 shades of red. "This is most irregular. The banns were read for your brother. On not the license specifically names, the license names Ashford." Aldrich produced a folded document from his coat pocket, sliding it across the altar with one gloved finger. "It does not specify which Ashford. An oversight my brother made when filing the paperwork, likely because he never intended to honor it. I am legally entitled to fulfill the contract in his stead." The vicar examined the document, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. Behind them, the whispers had resumed, a rising tide of shock and speculation that threatened to drown out all rational thought. Celine felt as though she were watching herself from a great distance, as though she had somehow stepped outside her own body and was observing a stranger in a wedding gown, standing beside a man she barely knew. See, about to pledge her life to someone who looked at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a bride to be cherished. This is technically valid, the vicar admitted, though his tone suggested he wished it weren't. However, the young lady must consent freely. Miss Whitmore, I must ask you directly, do you enter into this union of your own will? Every eye in the chapel fixed upon her. Celine thought of her mother, who had sold her wedding ring last winter to pay for coal, of her brother Niles, whose apprenticeship fees were 3 months overdue, of their modest house on Bellamy Street, mortgaged to the chimney pots against debts her father had accumulated before his death. She thought of what would happen to all of them if she walked out of this chapel unmarried. The creditors would descend like crows. They would pick clean the bones of everything her family had left. And she thought of Emmerich, beautiful, laughing Emmerich, who had courted her with poetry and promises, who had kissed her hand and called her his salvation, who had apparently been bedding the Barrington widow for months while swearing eternal devotion. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos within. I consent freely. A flash of surprise crossed Aldrich's face. Perhaps he hadn't expected her to choose so quickly, or perhaps satisfaction that his calculation had proved correct. The vicar cleared his throat. Very well, then let us proceed. Though I must say, in all my years of service— Proceed, Aldrich interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Now. The ceremony passed in a blur. Celine heard herself speak the vows, heard Aldrich's deep voice echo them back. But the words seemed to belong to someone else. She was aware of his hand on hers, of the weight of the ring, a heavy gold band she had never seen before, sliding onto her finger. She was aware of the vicar pronouncing them man and wife, of the strange finality that settled over the chapel like a shroud. When Aldrich turned to her, she braced herself for the customary kiss. It never came. Instead, he inclined his head in the barest acknowledgement of the ceremony's completion and turned to face the congregation. His hand remained on hers, possessive and proprietary, as he guided her down the aisle toward the chapel doors. The crowd parted before them like the sea before Moses. Some faces showed shock, others barely concealed delight at the scandal unfolding before them. On a few, Lady Pemberton and her daughter Honoria among them, wore expressions of such venomous fury that Celine nearly stumbled. Keep walking, Aldrich murmured, so low only she could hear. Do not look at them. Do not acknowledge their stares. You are the Duchess of Ravenscourt now. They are beneath your notice. Duchess! The title crashed through her awareness like cold water. She had entered this chapel as Miss Celine Whitmore, the impoverished daughter of a dead gambler, about to marry a second son, with modest prospects and considerable charm. She was leaving it as the Duchess of Ravenscourt, wife to one of the most powerful men in England. The sunlight hit her face as they emerged from the chapel, and Celine blinked against its assault. A carriage waited at the base of the steps, black and gleaming. The Ravenscourt crest emblazoned on its door in silver and midnight blue. Your Grace, a voice from behind them, sharp with authority. Celine turned to see the Dowager Duchess descending the chapel steps, her silver hair perfectly arranged beneath a hat that probably cost more than Celine's entire trousseau. What is the meaning of this? Where is Emmerich? Why have you— Not here, grandmother. Aldrich handed Celine into the carriage without ceremony. Ravenscourt House, 1 hour. I will explain everything then. You will explain everything now, young man. Do you have any idea what you've done? The scandal, the talk, will happen regardless. Aldrich climbed into the carriage beside Celine, pulling the door closed with a decisive click. 1 hour, grandmother. Try not to murder anyone in the interim. He rapped twice on the roof, and the carriage lurched into motion, carrying them away from the chapel, the crowds, and the wreckage of the morning. Silence descended. Solane sat rigid on the velvet bench, hyper-aware of the man beside her. In the enclosed space, he seemed even larger than before, his presence filling the carriage like smoke. He had removed his gloves and was examining his hands with apparent fascination, though Solane suspected he was simply avoiding looking at her. "You have questions," he said finally, still not meeting her eyes. "I have nothing but questions, Your Grace." "Aldrich." The correction was automatic, almost impatient. "You're my wife now. Formality would be absurd." "Wife?" The word sent a shock through her system every time she heard it. "Aldrich, then." She forced herself to breathe, to think. "Why did you do this? And do not tell me again that your reasons don't concern me. You just married me in front of 300 people. I believe I've earned an explanation." He was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless, as though he were reciting a particularly tedious legal document. "My brother has been stealing from the estate for 3 years. Small amounts at first, easily overlooked, then larger sums. By the time I discovered the extent of his debts, he had already promised marriage to 4 different women, each time collecting substantial dowries and gifts before finding excuses to end the engagements." Solene's stomach turned. 4 women? "That I know of. There may be more." His jaw tightened. "You were to be the 5th, or rather, you were to be the final conquest. Your family has no money, but your father's remaining debts are held by several creditors who owed my brother gambling favors. He intended to collect on those favors through your marriage, essentially using you as collateral to clear his own accounts." The carriage suddenly felt too small, too airless. I was just a transaction." "Yes." Aldrich's voice held no softness, no attempt at comfort. "When I realized what he planned, I confronted him. He chose to flee rather than face consequences. I chose to ensure you didn't become another of his victims." Solane pressed her hand to her stomach, fighting the urge to be sick. All those months of courtship, all those pretty words and stolen glances, all of it had been calculation, performance, lies. "But why marriage?" she demanded. "You could have simply warned me, exposed him publicly. Why bind yourself to a woman you don't know for the rest of your life?" Something guarded surfaced in his expression, something dark. "Because warning you would not have paid your family's debts. Exposing him would not have saved your mother from the poorhouse. And because—" He stopped, his jaw working as though physically wrestling with the words. "Because?" Solane pressed. The carriage hit a rut in the road, jostling them both. When Aldrich spoke again, his voice was frost. "Because I am 32 years old, and my grandmother has spent the last decade parading eligible women before me like livestock at market. Because the ton believes I am cold, heartless, and incapable of human emotion, and I have neither the patience nor the inclination to prove them wrong. Because a wife I never intended to choose would have to be endured. But a wife chosen under these circumstances." He met her eyes for the first time since the chapel. "You owe me nothing but the appearance of a functional marriage. You expect nothing but security and respectability. We understand each other perfectly." Solane stared at him. "You married me," she said slowly, "because I'm convenient. I married you because we can help each other without the tedious complications of affection or expectation." He looked away again, out the window at the passing countryside. "In 6 months, perhaps a year, the scandal will fade. You will have a home, a title, and freedom to live as you please. I will have a wife who makes no demands on my time or attention. Everyone wins. Everyone wins." She had just bound herself for life to a man who viewed their marriage as a business arrangement. A man who explicitly stated he wanted no affection, no expectations, no complications. And somehow, impossibly, she felt grateful for his honesty. After Emrich's honeyed lies, Aldrich's cold truth was almost refreshing. Almost. And if I want more than that, she asked quietly. If I want a real marriage, children, a husband who actually looks at me? His eyes met hers again, and this time she saw something besides frost, something wounded, something carefully buried. Then you chose the wrong brother, he said. I am not capable of being what you want, Miss Whitmore. It would be cruel to pretend otherwise. The carriage slowed as they approached the gates of Ravenscourt House. Through the window, Celine glimpsed towering iron gates, stone griffins perched atop marble pillars, and beyond them, a house so grand it stole her breath. Her new home, her gilded cage. My name, she said as the carriage rolled to a stop, is Celine. If I'm to be your wife, you might as well use it. Something passed across his face. Not warmth, not quite, but perhaps its distant possibility. Celine, he repeated, as though testing the shape of it on his tongue. And despite everything, despite the horror and the heartbreak and the cold reality of what she had just done, a small, treacherous part of her thrilled at the sound of her name in his voice. Ravenscourt House rose from the landscape like a monument to power, all pale stone and towering windows, and gardens that stretched toward the horizon in perfect geometric precision. Celine had seen estates before. She had grown up on the edges of wealth, close enough to observe but never to touch. But this was something else entirely. This was dynasty made manifest. The entrance hall alone could have swallowed her family's entire house. Marble floors reflected light from a chandelier that dripped crystal like frozen tears. A sweeping staircase curved upward toward shadows. Portraits of stern-faced Ashfords lined the walls, their painted eyes following Celine's progress with silent judgment. Servants materialized instantly, appearing from doorways and alcoves with practiced silence. They took Aldrich's coat, offered refreshments, murmured congratulations that sounded more like condolences. Celine caught their sidelong glances, the curious assessment in their eyes. The new duchess, the replacement bride, the woman mad enough to marry the cold duke. Your Grace. A woman in severe black approached, for her silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed designed to discourage smiling. The morning room has been prepared as requested. Shall I have tea sent through? Yes. And inform my grandmother that I require privacy for the next hour. She may rage at me afterward. Aldrich's hand found the small of Celine's back, guiding her toward a door on the right. Come. We have much to discuss before the storm arrives. The morning room was smaller than Celine expected, almost intimate compared to the grandeur of the entrance hall. Pale blue walls, delicate furniture, flowers arranged in crystal vases. It felt like a space designed for women's correspondence and quiet conversation. Felt entirely wrong for what was about to happen. Sit, Aldrich said, gesturing to a settee near the window. You're pale. You haven't eaten since yesterday. I imagine. How did he know that? Had he been watching her even then, calculating and planning? Celine sat, though her spine remained rigid. She refused to collapse, refused to show weakness. If this man wanted a wife who made no demands, she would show him a wife who needed nothing from him at all. I have conditions, she said. Aldrich paused in the act of pouring tea. Pouring it himself, she noticed, despite the servants just outside the door. You have conditions. You cannot expect me to enter into an arrangement like this without protections. I expect nothing from you, as I've already stated. Then you'll have no objection to formalizing certain terms. Soline accepted the teacup he offered, noting the slight tremor in her own hands. She stilled it through force of will. First, my family. My mother and brother will be provided for. Not lavishly. I'm not asking for extravagance, but comfortably. Their debts cleared. Their home secured. Niles' apprenticeship paid in full. Already done. She blinked. What? The morning Emmerich fled, I sent my solicitor to address your family's outstanding obligations. The debts have been transferred to my accounts and will be settled within the week. Your brother's apprenticeship fees have been paid through completion. Your mother has been offered a cottage on the Ravenscourt estate, though she may prefer to remain in London. Either way, she will want for nothing. Soline stared at him. He had done all of this before the wedding, before she had agreed to anything, before he could have known whether she would accept his proposal at all. Why? The question came out hoarse. Because it was the right thing to do. He settled into a chair across from her, long legs stretched before him, the picture of aristocratic ease despite the tension in his jaw. Your family's suffering was a direct result of my brother's machinations. Correcting it was my responsibility, regardless of whether you married me. Something in Soline's chest shifted, a small crack in the armor of her resentment. My second condition, she continued, pushing past the unexpected emotion. I will not be treated as a prisoner in this house. I will have freedom to come and go as I please, to maintain my own correspondence, to receive visitors of my choosing. Granted, you're my wife, not my captive. Third, this was the difficult one, the one she had been dreading. I understand that you have no interest in the traditional expectations of marriage. I will not force myself upon you in any capacity, but neither will I accept infidelity. If you take a mistress, if you shame me publicly, I won't. The interruption was sharp, definitive. Soline met his eyes and saw something burning there, something that looked almost like offense. I am many things, Soline, but I am not my brother. When I make a vow, I keep it. You will have my faithfulness, if nothing else. If nothing else. The words hung between them, a reminder of everything she wouldn't have. Warmth, affection, love. And what are your conditions? She asked. Surely you have expectations of your own. Aldrich was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some point beyond her shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I require discretion. Whatever happens within this marriage stays within this marriage. I will not have my household become fodder for gossip. Agreed. I require your presence at social functions when necessary. Balls, dinners, events where my Duchess would be expected to appear. You will play your role convincingly. I can do that. And I require— He stopped, his jaw tightening. Pain, perhaps, or something older. I require that you do not ask about certain aspects of my past. There are doors in this house that remain closed for good reason. I will not open them. Not for you, not for anyone. Soline studied him, this strange, cold man who had just become her husband. There were shadows behind his eyes, she realized. Depths that his controlled exterior worked hard to conceal. Well, what kind of doors? The kind that contained things better left buried. He rose abruptly, moving to the window with his back to her. Do we have an agreement? She should refuse. Should demand full transparency from the man who would share her life. Should insist on knowing every secret, every shadow, and every locked room in this glittering prison. Instead, she thought of her own secrets, the things she had never told Emmerich, the parts of herself she kept carefully hidden. Everyone had locked doors. We have an agreement, she said. The tension in his shoulders eased fractionally. He turned back to face her, and for just a moment, so brief she might have imagined it, Something like gratitude crossed his features. "There's one more thing you should know," he said. "My grandmother will not accept this easily. She had plans for my marriage. Plans that did not include a woman she's never met. She will attempt to undermine you at every turn. She may try to drive you out entirely. Why are you warning me? Because forewarned is forearmed." He paused. "And because, despite what you may believe, I do not wish to see you suffer." Before Celine could respond, the door burst open. A young woman swept into the room like a summer storm, all honey-brown curls and bright eyes and silk skirts that swished with every step. She was perhaps 18 or 19, with a heart-shaped face that seemed designed for laughter. "You absolute madman!" she cried, throwing her arms around Aldrich with total disregard for propriety. "You brilliant, impossible madman! Everyone's talking about it. Lady Pemberton looks like she swallowed a wasp." Honoria actually cried. "It's the best thing that's happened all season." "Viola." Aldrich's voice was strained, though Celine detected something softer beneath the chill. "This is not the time. This is precisely the time." The girl, Viola, his sister, it had to be, released him and spun toward Celine, her eyes sparkling. "You must be her, the mysterious bride, the woman who tamed the untamable Duke of Ravenscourt." "I haven't tamed anyone," Celine said carefully, "and we've only just married. I'm not certain I've done anything at all." Viola laughed, a bright musical sound that seemed entirely foreign in this solemn house. "Oh, I like you already. Don't mind Aldrich. He's dreadful at first impressions, all frost and formality and pointed silences. But underneath he's actually quite—" "Viola." Aldrich's warning tone sharpened. "Grandmother is on her way. I need you to distract her, delay the inevitable confrontation, give you time to prepare your lovely new wife for the dragon's arrival." Viola grinned. "Already done. I told her Celine was feeling faint and needed time to recover. That buys you perhaps 20 minutes. "I don't feel faint," Celine objected. "Of course you don't. You look like a woman who survived far worse than a grandmother's temper. But she doesn't know that yet." Viola seized Celine's hands, squeezing them warmly. "Welcome to the family, sister. It's mostly terrible, but occasionally amusing. And now that you're here, at least I'll have someone sensible to talk to." She was gone as quickly as she'd arrived, a whirlwind of silk and chatter that left the room feeling strangely empty in her wake. Celine turned to Aldrich, who was rubbing his temples with the expression of a man who had long since given up on controlling his household. "Your sister," she said slowly, "is nothing like you. Viola is everything I'm not." The words held no bitterness, only a kind of weary acceptance. "She was born after our mother's death. Our father raised her himself, which meant she grew up believing in joy and possibility and the fundamental goodness of humanity. And you?" His eyes met hers, and for just a moment, the frost cracked. "I grew up differently." Before she could press further, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Firm, measured, implacable. The approaching tread of someone who expected the world to arrange itself according to her preferences. "The dragon arrives," Aldrich murmured. "Remember, Celine, she can only wound you if you let her. Whatever she says, whatever she threatens, you are my wife now. My Duchess. No one can take that from you." The doors swept open, and Celine faced the Dowager Duchess of Ravenscourt for the first time. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenscourt was not a tall woman, but she entered the morning room as though she were 7 feet of pure imperial authority. Her silver hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had probably been fashionable during the reign of the previous king. Her gown was black silk. Her jewelry consisted of a single strand of pearls that could have purchased a small country, and her eyes, the same pale blue as Aldrich's, held all the warmth of a February frost. She stopped 3 paces into the room, her gaze sweeping over Celine with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to cataloging flaws. "So," she said, "this is what all the fuss is about." Celine rose from the settee, grateful that her legs held steady. She had faced creditors who threatened to throw her family into the street. She had endured the pitying glances of former friends as her father's fortune evaporated. She could face one elderly woman, no matter how formidable. "Your Grace." She executed her best curtsy, the one her mother had drilled into her since childhood. "I apologize for the unconventional circumstances of our introduction." Unconventional. The dowager's lips thinned. "Is that what we're calling it? My grandson abandons the family on his wedding day. My other grandson marries a complete stranger in his place. And we're describing this as unconventional?" "Grandmother." Aldrich's voice carried a warning edge. "Celine is not responsible for Emmerich choices." "Celine. So is it? We're already using Christian names?" The dowager moved further into the room, each step precise and deliberate. "Tell me, girl, what exactly is your game here? What did you say to Aldrich to convince him that this farce was acceptable?" "I said nothing." Celine kept her voice steady. "I was as surprised as anyone when His Grace, when Aldrich, made his offer. And you accepted it, without hesitation, without question." "I accepted it because the alternative was watching my family destroyed." Something hot flared in Celine's chest. "I accepted it because your grandson Emmerich had apparently been planning to use me as collateral for his gambling debts. I accepted it because in that moment, marrying a stranger seemed preferable to becoming another of your family's victims." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Aldrich had gone very still beside her. The dowager's expression moved through something that might have been surprise before settling back into aristocratic displeasure. "You have a spine," the dowager observed. "That's something, at least." "I have more than a spine, Your Grace. I have intelligence, resilience, and absolutely nothing left to lose, which means your disapproval, however impressive, holds no power over me." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, impossibly, the corner of the dowager's mouth twitched. "Viola was right," she murmured. "You are interesting." She turned to Aldrich, her expression cooling again. "We will discuss this privately, tonight, after dinner." "As you wish. And you?" The dowager fixed Celine with one final look. "We'll be shown to your chambers. I assume you'll need time to adjust." She swept from the room without waiting for a response, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and implied threats. Celine released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That went better than expected," Aldrich said quietly. "That was better?" "She didn't threaten to disinherit me." "Progress." He moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "Mrs. Blackwood will show you to the Duchess's chambers. They adjoin mine through a shared sitting room, but I rarely use that entrance. You'll have privacy." Of course she would. He had made it abundantly clear that he wanted nothing from her beyond public performance. "Aldrich," his name stopped him. "What she said about Emmerich, about him being a victim, what did she mean?" His shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. "Nothing that concerns you." "Everything about this family concerns me now. I'm part of it, whether anyone likes it or not." He turned, and for just a moment his expression wavered. "Emmerich was my mother's favorite," he said flatly. "She died giving birth to Viola, but before that, before everything, Emmerich was the son she adored. I was the heir, the responsibility, the burden. He was the joy." A muscle worked in his jaw. When she died, something broke in him. Or perhaps it was always broken. and her love was simply covering the cracks. Either way, the brother I grew up with, the one who used to chase me through these halls, who taught me to fish in the lake, who promised we'd always protect each other, that brother died the same day my mother did. Soline's heart clenched. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. He straightened, the vulnerability vanishing behind his usual mask. Mrs. Blackwood will see to your needs. Dinner is at 8. He was gone before she could respond. The Duchess's chambers were magnificent. 3 connected rooms, a bedroom with a 4-poster bed draped in sage and gold, a dressing room with more closet space than Soline's entire former wardrobe, and a private sitting room with windows overlooking the estate's formal gardens. Mrs. Blackwood, the severe housekeeper from earlier, conducted the tour with professional efficiency, explaining the bell system, the placement of necessities, and the schedule of meals. A young maid named Dinah had been assigned as Soline's lady's maid, a freckled girl with nervous hands who curtsied so deeply she nearly toppled over. Her Grace, the Dowager, that is. She said you'd be needing a proper wardrobe, Sir Blackwood said. A modiste has been summoned for tomorrow morning. In the meantime, we've assembled some pieces that should suit. The wardrobe doors opened to reveal more gowns than Soline had owned in her entire life. Silks and satins in colors she had only dreamed of wearing. Deep plum, midnight blue, ivory that shimmered like moonlight on water. Kid gloves in every shade. Slippers so delicate they seemed made of air. These were prepared before, Mrs. Blackwood continued, her tone carefully neutral. For the original bride, the previous arrangement. For Emmeric's wife, the wife Soline was supposed to be. I see. Soline touched one of the sleeves, feeling the whisper-soft fabric beneath her fingers. Well, no point in letting them go to waste. That night, she lay in the enormous bed, surrounded by more comfort than she had ever known, and felt utterly alone. Through the wall, she could hear nothing from Aldrich's chambers. No footsteps, no movement, no indication that another human being existed on the other side of that shared sitting room. She was a duchess now. She had a title, a home, a future secured, and she had never felt more like a stranger in her own skin. The summons came the next morning, delivered by a footman so stoic he might have been carved from the same marble as the entrance hall. The Dowager Duchess requests your presence in the East Drawing Room, Your Grace, at your earliest convenience. Soline translated this as immediately, or face consequences, and set aside she barely touched breakfast. She found the Dowager seated by a window, morning light pooling around her, like she had commanded even the sun to attend her audience. See, a tea service sat untouched on the table beside her. 2 chairs faced each other across a Persian rug so fine that Soline was afraid to step on it. Sit. The Dowager gestured to the chair across from her. We have much to discuss, and I prefer to do so without witnesses. Soline sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. You surprised me yesterday, the Dowager began. I expected tears, apologies, perhaps even an attempt to flee once you understood what you'd married into. Instead, you showed teeth. She studied Soline with unsettling intensity. Tell me about your family. The truth, not whatever fairy story Emmerich fed society. There was no point in lying. The Dowager clearly already knew, or would soon discover, every shameful detail. My father was a merchant, Soline said. Successful once. He built his business from nothing, married my mother despite her family's objections, and gave us a comfortable life. She paused, memories pressing against the back of her throat. Then he discovered gambling. It started small. Cards at his club, the occasional horse race. By the time we realized how bad it had become, there was nothing left. He died 2 years ago, leaving us with debts we couldn't hope to repay. And your mother? Survives through dignity and determination. She taught us that poverty was not shameful, that integrity mattered more than fortune. Soline lifted her chin. I know I'm not what you wanted for your grandson. I have no connections, no dowry, no accomplishments beyond a decent education and the ability to remain upright during crisis. But I am not a fortune hunter, Your Grace. I did not scheme my way into this family. I was thrown here by circumstances neither of us could control. The dowager was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. You remind me of someone, she said. Someone I haven't thought of in many years. Who? Aldrich's mother. My daughter-in-law. The dowager's gaze drifted to the window, seeing something far beyond the manicured gardens. She was unsuitable too, by society's standards. The daughter of a country vicar. No fortune, no connections. My son met her by chance when his carriage broke down near her village, and he was besotted within an hour. I fought the match with everything I had. But he married her anyway. He did. Against my wishes, against all reason, against everything I had planned for him. The dowager's hands tightened on the arms of her chair, and she made him happy, impossibly, infuriatingly happy. For 15 years, she was the center of his world. What happened? She died, giving birth to Viola. The words came out flat, old pain worn smooth by time. My son never recovered. He died himself 3 years later. The physicians called it fever, but I know better. He died because he couldn't bear to live without her. Soline's breath caught. And Aldrich. Aldrich was 12 when his mother died, old enough to understand loss, young enough to be destroyed by it. The dowager's pale eyes returned to Soline, sharp as ever, but now carrying something else beneath the surface. He was devoted to her, you see, followed her everywhere, hung on her every word. And she loved him. Of course, but Emmerich was easier, brighter, less serious. She favored Emmerich. She didn't mean to. But children notice these things. They feel them, even when the adults believe they've hidden them well. The dowager leaned forward slightly. After she died, Aldrich changed. He was never a warm child, but he had been capable of joy. Afterward, he simply closed, like a house shuttering its windows against winter, one room at a time, until there was nothing visible from outside, but blank walls. Soline thought of the man who had proposed to her at the altar, his cold eyes, his calculated words, his explicit warning that he was incapable of being what she wanted. Is that why he is the way he is? She asked quietly. Because he lost his mother? Partly. The dowager's expression grew guarded. There are other factors, and things I will not speak of, things that are his to share if he ever chooses. But I will tell you this, girl. My grandson is not heartless. He has simply buried his heart so deeply that he's forgotten where to find it. Something shifted in Soline's chest. Understanding, perhaps. Or the first stirrings of something more dangerous. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm old, and I'm tired, and I have spent 10 years trying to force him into marriages he doesn't want, with women who would have made him miserable. The dowager's voice held an edge of bitter self-awareness. Lady Honoria Pemberton has been my candidate for the last 2 seasons, suitable in every way. Wealthy, beautiful, impeccably connected. She would have been the perfect Duchess of Ravenscourt. But she doesn't see him. She sees the title, the estates, or on the position. She would have married the Duke of Ravenscourt and never once wondered about Aldrich Ashford, the man beneath the crown. The dowager's gaze sharpened. You, on the other hand, looked at him in that chapel, like he was a puzzle you intended to solve. Celine felt heat rise to her cheeks. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. The older woman rose, moving toward the window with a grace that belied her age. I'm not giving you my blessing. Let us be clear about that. You are still unsuitable, still a scandal, still everything I didn't want. But I am giving you this warning. If you hurt him, if you use him, if you prove yourself to be anything like his brother, I will destroy you so completely that history itself will forget you existed. And if I don't? Celine found herself standing as well, refusing to be looked down upon. If I somehow managed to reach him, to make him happy. The dowager turned, and for just a moment, a glimmer of hope surfaced in those cold blue eyes. Then perhaps I'll finally stop paying for the sins of my own stubbornness. She moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. The Worcestershire ball is in 4 days. Society will be watching. Aldrich despises these events, but he'll attend with you because it's necessary. Don't disappoint me, girl. She was gone before Celine could respond. Left alone in the elegant room, Celine sank back into her chair and tried to process everything she had just learned. Aldrich had been wounded, not just by his mother's death, but by her preference for his brother. He had closed himself off to protect what remained of his heart. He had spent years building walls so high that even his own grandmother couldn't scale them. And somewhere in this glittering house, there were secrets. Locked doors. Things the dowager wouldn't speak of. Things that had shaped the cold Duke into the man he was today. Celine should leave well enough alone. Should accept her comfortable cage and ask no questions. Should play her role and demand nothing more. But she had never been good at leaving things alone. And something about Aldrich Ashford made her want to find every locked door in this house and throw them wide open. The Worcestershire ball was everything Celine had imagined, and nothing she had prepared for. The Worcestershire estate blazed with candlelight, hundreds of flames reflected in crystal chandeliers that dripped from ceilings, painted with scenes of mythological triumph. Music swelled from the ballroom, audible even from the entrance hall, where a receiving line stretched toward eternity. Every notable family in England seemed to have gathered for this one evening, dressed in their finest, jewels glittering, smiles sharp as daggers, and every single one of them was watching her. Celine stood at Aldrich's side, her hand resting on his arm with practiced grace. The gown she wore had been delivered that morning by Madame Fontaine, the most sought-after modiste in London, a confection of deep burgundy silk that made her dark hair glow and her pale skin luminous. Real sapphires hung at her throat and ears, drawn from the Ravenscourt collection by the dowager herself. "You look like a duchess," the older woman had said while fastening the clasp. "Now act like one." Celine was trying, but with each step deeper into the ballroom, she felt the whispers following her like shadows. That's her, the replacement bride. Married him right there at the altar. Can you imagine? Nobody knows a thing about her family. Emmerich was the charming one, everyone knows it. Must have trapped him somehow. Aldrich's arm tensed beneath her fingers, and she realized he could hear them too. "Ignore them," he murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "They're jackals. They feed on weakness. Then I won't show any." She lifted her chin higher, forcing a serene smile onto her lips. "I've faced worse than gossip." Approval ghosted across his features, fleeting, but real. "The first waltz will be announced soon. I'll claim you for it. That should signal my investment in this match." Investment. 'Tis such a cold word for dancing with one's wife. But before she could respond, a voice cut through the crowd like a bell. "Your Grace, how wonderful to see you finally emerged from hiding." The woman who approached was exquisite. There was no other word for it. Golden hair arranged in elaborate curls, emerald silk that clung to a figure that would make sculptors weep, a face so perfectly symmetrical it seemed almost inhuman. Her smile was radiant, though her eyes held the calculating gleam of a predator sighting prey. Lady Honoria. Aldrich's voice could have frozen the champagne in the server's hands. I wasn't aware you were attending. And missed the debut of your mysterious new Duchess? Lady Honoria's laugh was musical and entirely false. I wouldn't dream of it. The whole ton has been dying to meet her. Those emerald eyes turned to Celine, sweeping over her from head to toe with an assessment that missed nothing and approved of even less. So you're the one, Lady Honoria said. The woman who managed to catch Ravenscourt when so many others failed. You must share your secrets sometime. I'm sure they're fascinating. The insult was perfectly delivered, wrapped in politeness like poison in sugar. I'm afraid there's no secret, Lady Honoria. Celine kept her voice pleasant. Unless you count being abandoned at the altar as a strategy, I wouldn't recommend it. Terribly hard on the nerves. Behind her, she heard someone choke on their champagne. Lady Honoria's smile faltered. How delightfully self-deprecating. I've always found humility so charming in those who have little else to offer. Honoria. Aldrich's warning tone should have registered on scientific instruments. That's enough. I'm simply trying to welcome your wife to society, Your Grace. After all, she'll need friends in her new position. So many expectations. So many opportunities to stumble. Lady Honoria's smile sharpened. Speaking of which, I hear your brother has been spotted in Paris. Apparently, the Barrington widow found herself unexpectedly short of funds and returned to her husband. Poor Emmerich must be quite desperate by now. Celine felt the words land like arrows. Emmerich, in Paris, desperate. My brother's whereabouts are none of my concern, Aldrich said flatly. Nor yours. Of course not. I only mention it because, well, these things have a way of coming back around. So, don't they? Lost causes. Former attachments. Lady Honoria's gaze fixed on Celine with terrible precision. First loves. The words hung in the air like smoke. Celine's heart clenched despite herself. First loves. What did that mean? Was Honoria implying that Emmerich had genuinely cared for her? Or that she, Celine, still harbored feelings for the man who had destroyed her? Or was she implying something else entirely? The waltz is beginning, Aldrich said abruptly. If you'll excuse us, Lady Honoria, my wife owes me a dance. He guided Celine away before Honoria could respond, his hand pressing firmly against the small of her back. The crowd parted before them as they moved toward the dance floor, and Celine could feel every eye in the room tracking their progress. Don't let her rattle you, Aldrich murmured as they took their positions. She's angry because she believed she had a claim on me. Did she? My grandmother believed it. I never did. The music began, and Aldrich swept her into the waltz with surprising grace. For a man who claimed to despise social functions, he moved with the ease of someone who had been dancing since childhood, which, Celine realized, he probably had. What did she mean? Celine asked as they turned across the floor. About first loves, about things coming back around. Aldrich's jaw tightened. Nothing that matters. It mattered enough to make you tense. Everything about Honoria Pemberton makes me tense. She's been circling like a vulture for 3 seasons. They moved through the pattern of the dance, bodies close but not quite touching, perfectly proper despite the intimacy of the moment. Celine was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the controlled strength in every movement. You dance well, she said, seeking neutral ground. I had excellent tutors. His lips curved slightly, Not quite a smile, but closer than she'd seen. "You're surprised." I assumed a man who avoided balls would have avoided lessons, too. My mother loved dancing. Something softened in his expression. She insisted I learn properly. Said a gentleman who couldn't waltz was a disgrace to his family. It was the most personal thing he had ever volunteered about himself. Celine tucked it away like a precious stone. "She sounds wonderful." She was. The softness disappeared, replaced by his usual controlled mask. That was a long time ago. The waltz ended, and they separated to polite applause. But before Celine could catch her breath, another figure materialized beside them. Lord Cresswell, an older gentleman with silver whiskers and a reputation for gossip that would put any society matron to shame. Ravenscourt, and the delight-hat new Duchess. What a pleasure. His eyes gleamed with poorly concealed curiosity. "The whole room is buzzing about you, my dear. Such a romantic story. Swept off your feet by one brother, married to another. Positively poetic." "I wouldn't call it poetry, my lord." Celine kept her voice light. "More like prose. The messy, complicated kind." Lord Cresswell laughed. "Oh, she's clever, Ravenscourt. I see why you kept her." Aldrich's expression could have curdled milk. "My wife is not a possession I kept, Cresswell. She's a person who made a choice." Of course. Of course. But the damage was done. Celine could see others drifting closer, eager to observe the exchange. Though one does wonder what choice the former bride would have made if given more complete information beforehand. The implications slithered through the crowd. Celine felt her blood chill. "What information would that be, my lord?" she asked sweetly. "Why, the information about your current husband's past, of course. His history with, well..." Cresswell's smile turned serpentine. "Perhaps that's a conversation for another time. I wouldn't want to spoil such a lovely evening with old unpleasantness." He bowed and retreated, leaving chaos in his wake. Celine turned to Aldrich. His face had gone pale beneath its usual composure, and old pain flickered behind his eyes before he suppressed it. "What was he talking about?" she demanded quietly. "Not here. Aldrich, not. Here." He gripped her elbow, steering her toward the terrace doors with barely controlled urgency. "Smile. Look pleasant. We're going for air." The terrace was cooler, darker, lit only by scattered lanterns and the distant glow from the ballroom windows. A few couples lingered at the edges, speaking in low voices, but Aldrich guided Celine to a shadowed alcove where they could not be overheard. "What is going on?" Celine hissed. "What history? What is everyone hinting at?" Aldrich braced his hands on the stone balustrade, his shoulders tight with tension. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "Before Emmerich, before any of this, there was someone else." Celine's breath caught. "Someone you loved?" "Someone I thought I would marry." The words came out rough, torn from somewhere deep. "It was 5 years ago. Her name was Marguerite Ashby. She was everything society wanted, beautiful, accomplished, and perfectly suitable. And I was young enough to believe that duty and desire could coincide." "What happened?" The silence stretched so long that Celine thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he turned to face her, and what she saw in his eyes made her heart crack. "Emmerich happened," he said. "He always does." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the ballroom. Raised voices, gasps, the unmistakable sound of scandal in bloom. And through the terrace doors, Celine saw a figure she had hoped never to see again. Golden hair, charming smile, the face of the man who had left her at the altar. Emmerich Ashford had returned. Emmerich looked different, thinner, perhaps, with shadows beneath his eyes, that hadn't been there before. But his smile was the same, that dazzling, devastating smile that had once made Celine believe in fairy tales. "Brother," he spread his arms wide as he entered the ballroom, seemingly oblivious to the shocked silence surrounding him. "And my lovely almost bride. What a delightful reunion." Aldrich moved before Celine could react, positioning himself between her and his brother, with the protective instinct of a wolf guarding its territory. "You have no business here, Emmerich." "No business? This is the Worcestershire Ball, Aldrich. Everyone who matters attends." Emmerich's smile flickered, something darker surfacing beneath the charm. "Though I admit, I didn't expect to find my former fiancée wearing the Ravenscourt sapphires. Those were meant to be her wedding gift. From me. You forfeited any claim to her when you fled to the continent with another man's wife," Aldrich said coldly. "She owes you nothing. You will not speak to her. You will not approach her. You will leave this ballroom immediately, or I will have you removed." So protective. Emmerich's eyes slid past his brother to fix on Celine. "Tell me, darling, does he treat you well? Does he make you laugh? Does he hold you at night and whisper sweet words?" His voice dropped to something almost pitying. "Or does he sit in his study until midnight, buried in ledgers, while you lie alone in that enormous bed, wondering what you've done?" The words struck bone, because they were true. Every night since their wedding, Aldrich had retreated to his study after dinner, leaving Solange alone in the silence of the Duchess's chambers. "So that's enough." Aldrich's voice had gone deadly quiet. "Get out. I only wanted to see her, to apologize." Emmerich held up his hands in mock surrender. Surely a man deserves the chance to explain himself. "You explained yourself perfectly when you abandoned her at the altar." Aldrich stepped closer to his brother, and Celine saw something volcanic churning beneath his frozen surface. "You humiliated her in front of 300 people. You would have destroyed her family to cover your gambling debts. You don't deserve to speak her name." Something ugly twisted Emmerich's features. "Always the righteous one, aren't you? Saint Aldrich, swooping in to save the day. Tell me, brother, did you enjoy it? Taking what was meant to be mine? She was never yours. She wore my ring. She spoke my vows, the rehearsal ones anyway. She let me—" The punch happened so fast, Celine barely saw it. One moment, Aldrich was standing rigid with fury. The next, Emmerich was sprawling across the marble floor, blood streaming from his nose. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Ladies screamed. Gentlemen surged forward. Lord Worcestershire himself appeared, his face purple with indignation. And through it all, Aldrich stood perfectly still, his knuckles split and bleeding, his expression unyielding as iron. "He fell," Aldrich said flatly. "Clumsy of him. Someone should see him out." 2 footmen materialized, hauling Emmerich to his feet with barely concealed satisfaction. Emmerich struggled, shouting something about inheritance and betrayal, but his words were lost in the cacophony. Solange couldn't move, couldn't think, could only stare at the man she had married. This cold, not controlled man who had just committed violence in her defense, in front of the entire ton. "We're leaving." Aldrich's hand closed around her elbow. "Now." The carriage ride back to Ravenscourt was silent. Aldrich sat across from her, methodically wrapping his injured hand in a handkerchief, his face betraying nothing. Solange watched him, her mind racing. "You didn't have to do that," she finally said. "Yes, I did. It will cause a scandal. There was already a scandal. Now there's simply a more interesting one." He tied off the makeshift bandage with his teeth, still not meeting her eyes. Emmerich has always known exactly which words wound deepest. I should have stopped him sooner. What he said about Marguerite, Aldrich's entire body went rigid. Don't. I need to understand. If we're to be married, truly married, and not just this performance, I need to know what I'm dealing with. The silence stretched like a held breath. Outside, the carriage wheels clattered against cobblestones, carrying them through the darkened streets of London. When Aldrich finally spoke, his voice sounded scraped raw. I met Marguerite at a house party. I was 25, newly come into the title after my father's death, drowning in responsibilities I wasn't prepared for. She was light. Everything I wasn't. She made me believe I could be more than duty and obligation. Soline's chest ached. You loved her. I thought I did. I thought she'd loved me. He laughed, a bitter sound without humor. I proposed after 3 months. She accepted. We were to marry that spring. What happened? Emmerich happened. The words fell like stones into still water. He was 20 then, charming, carefree, everything I couldn't be. He saw Marguerite and decided he wanted her. Not because he loved her. Emmerich has never loved anything but himself. But because she was mine. Soline felt sick. She chose him? She didn't choose him so much as she was seduced by him, by the fantasy of running away together, escaping the rigid structure of society. She left me a note, couldn't even tell me to my face, explaining that she'd realized I was too cold, too controlled, too incapable of real passion. His jaw worked. She said she pitied whoever eventually married me. The words hung between them, bleeding. Aldrich. I found them at an inn 3 days later. They hadn't gone far. Emmerich had run out of money, as usual. Marguerite was already regretting her choice, already realizing that charm fades quickly when there's no substance beneath it. His eyes finally met hers, and what Soline saw there made her heart crack. She begged me to take her back, said it had been a mistake, that she hadn't understood what she was throwing away. What did you do? I walked away. Whatever I had felt for her died the moment I read that note. He turned to look out the window, presenting her with his profile. Emmerich moved on to his next conquest within weeks. Marguerite married a viscount twice her age and moved to Scotland. I haven't seen or spoken to her since. The carriage slowed as they approached Ravenscourt House. Soline could see candlelight flickering in the windows, servants waiting for their return. Is that why you're so cold? She asked quietly. Because she broke your heart? She didn't break my heart. She confirmed what I had always suspected, that allowing people close only gives them weapons to destroy you. He stepped down from the carriage, offering his hand to help her descend. I told you when we married, Soline, I am not capable of being what you want. Now you understand why. He walked into the house without looking back. Soline stood in the darkness, the weight of his confession pressing down on her shoulders. He believed himself broken, believed himself incapable of love. And somehow, impossibly, she found herself wanting to prove him wrong. 3 days passed, 3 days of careful avoidance, of polite conversation at meals, of doors closing softly and footsteps retreating down endless hallways. Aldrich had withdrawn even further than before, leaving for his study before breakfast and remaining there until long after Soline retired. But something had shifted between them. Soline could feel it in the weight of his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking, in the way his hand lingered on hers when passing the salt at dinner, in the charged silence that filled every room they occupied together. On the 4th day, she found him in the library. It was past midnight. She had woken from a dream she couldn't remember, and sleep had refused to return. The house was silent as a tomb as she made her way downstairs, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name. The library door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the corridor. Soline pushed it open. Aldrich sat in a leather chair before the dying fire, a book open in his lap that he clearly hadn't been reading. His coat and cravat had been discarded, his shirt unbuttoned at the throat, his hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. He looked up at her entrance, and for once, his walls were down. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly, suddenly aware of her thin nightgown, the robe barely covering it. "I didn't expect anyone to be awake." "Neither could I." He closed the book, setting it aside. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About you. About this." He gestured vaguely at the space between them. "About whether I've made a terrible mistake." Soline's heart stuttered. "Do you think you have?" "I think—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair with uncharacteristic frustration. "I think I've spent 5 years building walls so high that I've forgotten what sunlight feels like. I think I convinced myself that safety was the same as survival. And I think you've been dismantling those walls since the moment you put your hand in mine at that altar." She crossed the room slowly, her bare feet silent on the carpet. "Is that a bad thing?" "It should be. It's dangerous. It's everything I promised myself I would never allow again." "But—" He rose from the chair, meeting her halfway. They stood inches apart, close enough that she could see the firelight reflected in his eyes. "But I can't seem to stop," he said roughly. "I can't stop watching you at dinner. I can't stop listening for your footsteps in the hallway. I can't stop thinking about what it would be like to actually know you, not as a wife I acquired through circumstance, but as a person I chose." Soline's breath caught. Aldrich, I should have told you from the beginning. About Marguerite, about Emmerich, about all of it. Instead, I tried to protect myself by keeping you at a distance." His hand rose, hovering near her cheek without quite touching. "I'm tired of distance, Celine. I'm tired of being cold." "Then don't be." The words came out barely above a whisper, but they were enough. He kissed her. Not gently. There was nothing gentle about it. 5 years of loneliness and 3 weeks of suppressed desire poured through that kiss like a dam breaking. His hands buried themselves in her hair, pulling her closer as her own fists gripped the front of his shirt. She tasted desperation on his lips, need and fear, and something fragile beneath it all. Hope, perhaps, or its trembling cousin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "This changes things," he said roughly. "Yes. I don't know how to do this, how to be what you deserve." "Neither do I." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "But I'm willing to learn if you are." Something cracked in his expression, something that had been frozen for 5 long years. "Soline!" The door burst open. Viola stood in the doorway, her face pale with panic. "Aldrich, you have to come now. It's grandmother. She's collapsed." The Dowager Duchess lay in her bed, diminished in a way that seemed impossible for a woman of such commanding presence. Physicians had been summoned. Servants hovered anxiously, and Viola sat weeping in a chair by the window. "Her heart," the doctor explained quietly, drawing Aldrich aside. "It's been weakening for some time, apparently, though she refused to inform anyone. The excitement of the ball, the confrontation with your brother, it was too much strain." Aldrich's face had gone gray. "Will she survive?" "Tonight. Likely yes. Beyond that," the doctor shook his head, "she needs absolute rest. No stress, no upsets, no excitement of any kind. Even then, I cannot promise recovery." Soline watched from the doorway, feeling desperately out of place. This was family grief, family crisis. She had been part of this household for mere weeks. She didn't belong in this intimate moment of fear. She was turning to leave when the Dowager's voice, thin but commanding, cut through the room. "Where is she? Where is the girl?" Aldrich looked at Soline, his eyes betraying nothing. "She's here, grandmother. She's here. Bring her to me." Soline approached the bed slowly, to her heart hammering. The dowager's hand, papery and cold, seized hers with surprising strength. "I saw you," the old woman rasped. "Coming out of the library, both of you." Heat flooded Celine's face. "Your Grace." "Don't explain. Don't apologize." The dowager's pale eyes fixed on hers with fierce intensity. "I saw the way he looked at you. I haven't seen him look at anyone like that since—" She coughed, the sound wet and terrible. "Since his mother. Please, rest. Don't exert yourself. I'll rest when I'm dead, which may be sooner than any of us prefer." The grip on Celine's hand tightened. "Listen to me carefully, girl. My grandson has been a ghost for 5 years. Empty, going through motions, waiting to die without actually living. You've changed that. I don't know how, but you've changed that. I haven't done anything. You stayed." The words came out fierce, almost angry. "Everyone else he trusted either left or betrayed him. His mother died. Marguerite ran. Emmerich destroyed everything he touched. But you stayed, even when he was cold, even when he gave you nothing." Tears pricked Celine's eyes. "He gave me more than he knows." "Then don't waste it. Don't let my death, whenever it comes, send him back into that frozen shell. Promise me." "I promise." The dowager's eyes closed, exhaustion winning over will. "Good. Now get out. All of you. Let an old woman sleep in peace." The next 3 days were a blur of sick-room vigils and whispered consultations. The dowager improved slightly, enough to issue orders from her bed and terrorize the servants who brought her broth. Viola barely left her side. And Aldrich had retreated behind his walls again. Celine understood. She did. His grandmother was dying, his family was fracturing, and everything he had built was threatening to crumble. He needed to be strong, to manage the crisis, to hold the pieces together. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. On the 4th day, Lady Honoria called. She arrived with her mother, bearing flowers and false sympathy, and a gleam in her eyes that Celine recognized instantly. The vultures were circling. "Such a tragedy," Lady Honoria murmured, arranging herself on the morning room settee with practiced grace. "The dowager has always been such a pillar of strength. I simply had to pay my respects." "How kind," Celine said flatly. "Of course, in times like these, family must come together." Honoria's smile sharpened. Real family, that is. People who understand the weight of the Ravenscourt legacy, who were raised to carry such burdens. As opposed to strangers who happened to be standing at the altar when an opportunity presented itself. Honoria's mask slipped, revealing the venom beneath. "Did you truly think you belonged here? A merchant's daughter playing Duchess while the real family suffers? That's enough, Honoria." Aldrich's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "You will not speak to my wife that way in my house. I'm simply telling the truth, Your Grace. Someone should." Honoria rose, her composure cracking. "She's a fraud, a convenience. You married her because you were angry at Emmerich, not because you wanted her. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows nothing, don't they? Then why do you still sleep in separate rooms? Why haven't you taken her to any of the events since the Worcestershire ball? Why does she wander this house alone while you hide in your study?" Honoria's voice rose. "Because you don't want her, Aldrich. You never did. And once the dowager dies, once the scandal fades, you'll put her aside like the mistake she is." The words landed like physical blows, because they echoed every fear Celine had harbored since the wedding, that she was temporary, convenient, a placeholder rather than a partner. "Get out." Aldrich's voice dropped to something lethal. "Now." Honoria gathered her mother and swept from the room, her parting glance promising this wasn't over. The silence that followed was suffocating. "She's wrong," Aldrich said finally. "Everything she said, is it?" Celine's voice came out broken. "Well, because you have been avoiding me since the night in the library. You haven't looked at me, spoken to me beyond necessity, touched me since that kiss. Either you regret what happened, or Honoria is right. I'm simply a convenience you no longer need." "That's not... I can't do this." The words tore from somewhere deep. "I can't wait in this beautiful house, wearing these beautiful clothes, wondering if my husband even wants me here. I spent my whole engagement to Emmerich believing in pretty lies. I won't do it again. Celine, I'm going home." She was moving before she consciously decided, heading for the door. "To my mother's. I need time to think. I need..." "Please," his voice cracked. "Please don't go." She stopped, but didn't turn. "Everyone leaves," he said hoarsely. "My mother, Marguerite, and Emmerich. Everyone I've ever allowed close has left. I've been distant because I'm terrified, because the moment I admitted to myself that I'm falling in love with you, I knew I would destroy it somehow. I knew you would eventually see what everyone else sees, that I'm cold, broken, and incapable. I don't see that. You will, eventually. And when you do..." His breath shuddered. "I thought if I kept my distance now, it would hurt less later." Celine turned. Aldrich stood in the middle of the room, his composure shattered, looking more lost than she had ever seen him. "You're an idiot," she whispered. "I know. I'm still leaving. Not because I don't care, because I care too much. Because I need to know that when I come back, if I come back, it's a choice. Not obligation, not convenience. Choice." She walked out before she could change her mind. Behind her, she heard something that might have been a sob. Her mother's cottage in London was smaller than Celine remembered. She had chosen the city, rather than accept the estate lodgings Aldrich had offered. The rooms felt cramped, the furniture worn, the silence a different quality than the vast quiet of Ravenscourt. "He's written every day," her mother said gently, setting a stack of letters on the kitchen table. "The courier waits for hours in case you want to send a reply." Celine stared at the pile. 8 letters in 5 days, each sealed with the Ravenscourt crest. "I'm not ready." Are you punishing him or yourself? Both, perhaps. Her mother sat across from her, the same woman who had sold her wedding ring to keep them warm, who had taken in mending until her fingers bled, who had never once complained about their fall from comfort. "When your father's business failed," she said slowly, "I wanted to run, to take you children and disappear somewhere no one knew our shame. I thought distance would protect us from more pain." "Why didn't you?" "Because running is just another form of losing. You can't outrun your heart, darling. It follows you wherever you go." That night, Celine finally opened the letters. The first was formal, stilted, an apology for his behavior, an acknowledgement that she deserved better. The second was longer, rawer, describing his grandmother's condition and his fears about losing her. The third contained no words at all, just a pressed flower from the Ravenscourt gardens, a white rose, and the kind that grew beneath the library windows. By the 5th letter, his control had crumbled entirely. "I cannot sleep. I walk the halls at night like a ghost, and every shadow reminds me of you. I thought I knew loneliness. I have been alone for years. But this is something different. This is absence. This is the shape of you carved out of every room I enter. I was wrong to push you away. Wrong to let my fear control me. Wrong to make you doubt what you mean to me. You asked me once if I wanted more than convenience. I couldn't answer then. I can answer now. I want everything. I want mornings and evenings and the quiet hours between. I want arguments and reconciliations and the mundane details of a life shared. I want to know how you take your tea and what makes you laugh and which books you've read so many times the spines are cracked. I want to deserve you. I don't yet. But I'm willing to spend the rest of my life trying, if you'll let me. Come home, Celine. Please. Come home. Tears streamed down her face. Mama, she whispered, I need to go back. Ravenscourt House blazed with light when her carriage arrived. Celine barely waited for the wheels to stop before she was descending, lifting her skirts to run up the steps like some wild creature rather than a duchess. The door opened before she reached it. Aldrich stood in the entrance hall, disheveled, exhausted, looking at her like she was water in a desert. You came back. I never really left. She stopped at the threshold, drinking in the sight of him. Not in the ways that matter. Celine, let me speak, please. She stepped inside, closing the distance between them. I read your letters, every word, and I need you to understand something before we go any further. Anything. I am not Marguerite. I am not going to run away with your brother, or leave you a note, or decide that your coldness is too much to bear. Her voice strengthened. I have survived poverty, humiliation, and being abandoned at the altar by a man I thought I loved. I am not fragile. I am not temporary. And if you try to push me away again to protect yourself from potential pain, I will simply push back harder. Something broke in his expression. Something that had been frozen for 5 long years. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But I'm here anyway. She reached up, touching his face for the first time by her own choice. I'm choosing you, Aldrich, not because I have to, not because there's no alternative, because underneath all that ice, there's a man worth loving, and I intend to love him if he'll let me. He kissed her then, not with the desperate hunger of their first kiss, but with something deeper, reverent, like she was sacred ground he had finally been permitted to enter. I love you, he breathed against her lips. I've been falling since the moment you looked at me in that chapel and called me insane. You were insane. Still am. About you. Aldrich. Viola's voice came from the stairs, trembling with emotion. Grandmother is asking for both of you. She says she's ready. They found the dowager propped against pillows, looking surprisingly alert for a woman who had spent a week at death's door. So, she said, surveying them with sharp eyes, you've sorted yourselves out. How did you? I have spies everywhere. Did you think I wouldn't know the moment her carriage entered the grounds? The dowager sniffed. Close the door. We need to discuss what happens next. Grandmother, you should rest. I'll rest when I'm satisfied that my family won't fall to pieces the moment I'm gone. She fixed her gaze on Celine. You kept your promise. You brought him back. Don't be modest. It's tedious. The dowager turned to Aldrich. Your brother has been spreading rumors, claiming the marriage was coerced, that Celine trapped you, that the whole thing should be annulled. Aldrich's jaw tightened. Let him talk. I intend to do more than that. The dowager smiled, and it was not a nice smile. The Hartwell masquerade is in 3 days. Every notable family in England will attend. I believe it's time to make a statement. What kind of statement? The dowager's eyes gleamed. The kind that leaves no room for doubt. The kind that silences every whisper, crushes every rumor, and makes it abundantly clear that Celine Ashford is the Duchess of Ravenscourt. Now and forever. The Hartwell masquerade was legendary, an annual spectacle of excess and intrigue, where masks permitted behavior that daylight would condemn. The ballroom glittered like a jewel box, hundreds of candles reflected in gilt mirrors, costumes transforming lords and ladies into peacocks and phantoms. Soline entered on Aldrich's arm, wearing a gown of midnight blue that sparkled with crystals like stars scattered across a night sky. Her mask was silver filigree, delicate as lace, matching the silver threads in Aldrich's coat. They looked like something from a fairy tale. They felt like a declaration of war. "Everyone is watching," Soline murmured. "Let them." Aldrich's hand tightened on hers. "After tonight, there will be nothing left to whisper about." The crowd parted before them as they moved through the ballroom. Soline saw Lady Honoria in emerald silk, her face rigid with fury. Saw Lord Cresswell with his hungry gossip's eyes. Saw Emmerich, because of course he was here, of course he couldn't resist, lurking near the refreshments with a scowl that suggested his attempts to undermine them had failed. The music shifted, and Aldrich drew her toward the center of the floor. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Trust me." They began to waltz, but this was no ordinary dance. This was a performance, a seduction, an unmistakable display of devotion that left nothing to interpretation. Aldrich held her closer than propriety allowed, his eyes never leaving hers, his movements speaking a language that needed no words. "I choose you," every step said. "I claim you. I love you." The crowd fell silent, watching. Even the orchestra seemed to play softer, as if afraid to interrupt the moment. When the waltz ended, Aldrich didn't release her. Instead, he turned to face the assembled guests, keeping Soline's hand firmly in his. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang through the ballroom, "I have an announcement." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "There have been rumors," Aldrich continued, his tone ice cold, "suggesting that my marriage was a mistake, a convenience, a temporary arrangement that would be quietly dissolved once the scandal faded." Soline's heart hammered. What was he doing? "I am here to put those rumors to rest." He turned to face her, and what she saw in his eyes stole her breath. "Soline Ashford is not my convenience. She is not my obligation. She is not a substitute for the wife I was supposed to have." He reached into his pocket and withdrew something that glittered in the candlelight. A ring, but not the simple gold band he had placed on her finger at the chapel. This was something else entirely. An enormous sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in intricate silver filigree that matched her mask. "This ring belonged to my mother," Aldrich said, his voice rough with emotion. "She wore it every day of her marriage because my father chose it specifically for her. It's been locked in a vault for 20 years because I couldn't bear to see it on anyone else's hand." He dropped to one knee. The ballroom gasped collectively. "Soline Whitmore Ashford," he said, looking up at her with everything he felt finally visible in his eyes. "I married you in desperation. I stayed with you out of duty. But somewhere between the chaos and the crisis, I fell in love with you. Completely, irrevocably, without reservation." Tears streamed down Soline's face. She didn't care. Let them see. Let them all see. "I know I did this badly the first time," Aldrich continued. "I know I gave you no choice, no courtship, no declaration of intent. So I'm asking now, properly. Will you stay married to me? Not because you have to. Not because there's no alternative. Because you want to. Because you choose me as I choose you." The silence was absolute. Every eye in the ballroom fixed on them. "Yes," Soline whispered. Then, stronger. "Yes. 1,000 times. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, next to the simple gold band, and rose to kiss her before the entire ton. The crowd erupted. Not in scandal, in applause, in cheers, in the kind of overwhelming approval that transforms gossip into legend. Lady Honoria fled the ballroom. Emmerich followed, his face twisted with defeat. And Soline saw the dowager standing at the edge of the crowd, leaning on Viola's arm, wearing an expression of profound satisfaction. I think, Aldrich murmured against her lips. We've made our statement. I think, Solene replied, laughing through her tears. We've made rather more than that. 1 year later, the library at Ravenscourt House had always been Aldrich's sanctuary. Now it was theirs. Solene sat in the leather chair by the fire, her feet tucked beneath her, reading from a volume of poetry, while Aldrich worked at his desk. The fire crackled softly. Rain pattered against the windows, and from the cradle beside the settee came the soft breathing of their daughter, 3 months old and already possessed of her father's stubborn jaw and her mother's dark eyes. She's stirring, Aldrich said, setting aside his ledger. She wants her father. She always wants her father. I'm beginning to think I'm being manipulated. By a 3-month-old? She has your cunning. I don't stand a chance. He crossed to the cradle and lifted their daughter with the careful tenderness that still surprised Solene, even now. This cold, controlled man, transformed into something softer by love he'd never expected to feel. Your grandmother wants to host a christening ball, Solene said. She's already planning the guest list. My grandmother has hosted 4 events this month. Her physician is going to have apoplexy. Her physician should know by now that the Dowager Duchess does whatever she pleases. Aldrich settled into the chair beside her, their daughter cradled against his chest. She's not wrong. The ton should see her, should see us, should understand that this family is not the scandal they once believed. Are you saying you want a ball? I'm saying I want to dance with my wife while our daughter sleeps and our family watches, and everyone who ever doubted us chokes on their envy. Solene laughed, the sound bright and free in a way that still felt new. Speaking of family, she said, I had a letter from Emmerich. Aldrich's expression cooled. Burn it. He's in Italy. Apparently he's found some countess willing to fund his lifestyle. He sends his regards. Burn it twice. I already did. She reached over, taking his free hand. He can't hurt us anymore. None of them can. Aldrich raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the reverent tenderness that still made her heart race. Do you know what day it is? He asked. Tuesday. It's been exactly 1 year since my brother abandoned you at the altar, and you were reckless enough to marry me instead. Solene laughed. You were the reckless one, proposing to a complete stranger in front of 300 horrified guests. You said yes. I was in shock, and you looked like you might actually murder someone if I refused. I might have. He leaned closer, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them. Best decision I ever made was walking into that chapel. Best decision you ever made was trusting a madman. Is that so? I have it on good authority. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance, listening to the rain, feeling the weight of everything they had built together, from scandal and heartbreak, something beautiful and true. I love you, Aldrich said quietly. 3 words. After everything they had survived, the abandoned altar, the cold distance, the crisis and reunion, the public triumph, 3 words still carried the power to move her. I love you too, Solene replied, even when you're an idiot. Especially then? Especially then. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, the fire burned warm, and the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscourt lived, against all odds and expectations, happily ever after.